The morning sun glared through the windows of Precinct 42, casting long streaks of light across the polished floors and metal desks. Officers shuffled papers, checked radios, and murmured about ongoing cases. The air smelled of coffee, disinfectant, and tension, a mixture that reminded every newcomer that this was a place where authority was earned, not assumed. Detective Marcus Blake, a seasoned white officer with a reputation for brash confidence, leaned casually against the front desk, arms crossed. He had been at Precinct 42 for nearly a decade and knew exactly how to navigate its unofficial hierarchy. Today, however, that confidence would be tested in ways he could never have anticipated. The precinct doors opened, and a woman stepped inside. She moved with quiet authority, every step measured. Serena Davis, the new precinct captain, had been assigned to lead this station. Black, composed, in a sharp navy suit, and radiating calm confidence, she carried herself in a way that immediately commanded attention without a word. Her eyes scanned the room, noting every officer's posture, every desk arrangement, and subtle deviations from protocol. Marcus smirked slightly as he approached her. "So, you're the new boss," he said casually, his tone dripping with a mix of curiosity and mockery. "First day, huh? Hope you know how things run around here." Serena stopped, studying him briefly. Her gaze was calm, unwavering, yet sharp enough to make him hesitate. "I'm aware," she said quietly, her voice controlled but full of authority. "And I expect everyone here to follow the rules, regardless of tenure or attitude." Marcus chuckled dismissively. Rules are one thing, respect is another. We'll see how you handle the reality of this place." He turned to check his radio, and when he looked back, Serena had moved closer to the administrative desk. A miscommunication over case files caused Marcus to react impulsively. His hand shot out suddenly, and in a split second, he slapped her across the shoulder, not hard, but enough to signal disrespect. The motion was careless, born from years of unchecked confidence. The precinct fell silent. Officers stopped mid-task, some glancing quickly between Marcus and Serena. Even the janitor paused, broom in hand, sensing the sudden shift in the air. Serena's composure did not falter. She took a single breath, her eyes locking onto Marcus's with the calm intensity of someone whose patience was absolute, but whose authority was undeniable. "Detective Blake," she said slowly, every word deliberate, "I suggest you learn exactly who you're addressing before you decide to act." Marcus blinked, confused. He expected surprise or hesitation, but not this level of control. He expected her to flinch, to be shocked. Instead, Serena stood firm, radiating a presence that made it clear. She was in command, even if he had assumed otherwise. Marcus stammered, the arrogance draining from his voice as he realized his mistake. The room seemed to shrink around him. Every officer now understood that the new captain was no ordinary leader. Her authority was absolute, and the slap, once an assertion of his supposed dominance, was now the spark for an immediate reversal of power. Serena didn't raise her voice. She didn't yell. She simply exuded command. Her hands rested lightly at her sides, her posture perfect, her gaze steady. The officers and staff could feel the unspoken power. This was a woman who did not tolerate disrespect, who understood control, and who had the full capacity to enforce consequences instantly. Marcus's colleagues exchanged glances. Whispers filled the corners of the precinct, cautious and subdued. The seasoned officers who had tolerated his brash behavior before now looked on with something approaching astonishment. They had underestimated her, and it was clear they were about to witness a masterclass in authority and poise. Serena moved slightly closer to the front desk, her hand brushing over the files in a precise motion. "Detective Blake," she continued, calm but firm, "your behavior just now is unacceptable. I expect an immediate report explaining your actions and your acknowledgement of the chain of command here." The room held its collective breath. Marcus felt a cold tension settle into his chest. He had thought this was a simple slap, an assertion of casual authority, but now every detail of his misjudgment became apparent. The wrong person, the wrong action, the wrong day. Serena's presence alone was enough to assert dominance, yet she also demonstrated meticulous strategy. She would allow consequences to unfold, precisely measured, ensuring that lessons were learned, respect was enforced, and authority remained unchallenged. Every officer, from the newest rookie to the seasoned detectives, understood that her leadership would not be questioned again. The air in the precinct was electric. Marcus swallowed hard, realizing that the balance of power had shifted completely. He had assumed he understood the hierarchy. He had been wrong. And the black woman standing before him, calm, collected, and authoritative, had already begun to restructure that hierarchy with a single, measured response. In that moment, it became undeniable. Today was not Marcus's day. It was Serena's first day, and she had just taught a lesson that no officer would forget. The slap, once an act of arrogance, had triggered a cascade of awareness, authority, and the beginning of immediate consequences that would echo throughout the precinct. The whispers among the officers grew quieter, replaced by attentive observation. Everyone now knew that Serena Davis was a force to be reckoned with, a leader whose control, patience, and strategic response could dismantle arrogance instantly. And Marcus? He was only beginning to grasp the magnitude of his miscalculation. The precinct had gone quiet. The usual background hum of radios, keyboards, and casual chatter was replaced with a tension so palpable it could be felt in every corner. Officers stopped mid-task, their attention drawn to the unfolding dynamic between Serena Davis, the new black precinct captain, and Detective Marcus Blake. Marcus rubbed his forearm where he had slapped her, realizing the weight of his mistake. Pride and arrogance had driven his action, but the consequences were immediate. Every officer in the room was now watching, some with surprise, some with apprehension. No one had ever seen a first-day leader command a room like this without raising her voice. Serena, calm and composed, adjusted her blazer slightly and leaned forward, her eyes locked on Marcus with unwavering intensity. "Detective Blake," she said slowly, clearly enunciating each word, "you will submit a written explanation for your actions within the next hour. Failure to comply will result in formal disciplinary measures." The words were quiet, almost measured, but their authority resonated across the precinct. Marcus felt the room shrink around him. He opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. The realization hit him hard. This was no ordinary leader. She had observed, assessed, and executed control all in silence. Nearby officers exchanged subtle glances. Some leaned back, muttering quietly, realizing the hierarchy had shifted. Marcus had assumed familiarity and control in this environment, but Serena's first-day demonstration proved him wrong. Authority was now visibly hers, and it radiated with an intensity that could not be ignored. A young patrol officer hesitated near the front desk. She had been watching the interaction unfold. Her hand hovered over her radio, uncertain if she should intervene. Serena's presence alone told her everything. No intervention was necessary. The structural authority of the precinct captain was sufficient to control the situation. The phone at the front desk buzzed. A message appeared. "Chief Davis, your new officer has been addressed." Serena glanced at it briefly, her expression unchanged. Every movement, every decision was deliberate. Marcus's mistake was not just about the slap. It was about misunderstanding the chain of command and underestimating the person in front of him. Marcus finally spoke, his voice tight. I didn't know, He trailed off, realizing that ignorance was no longer a defense. The room had internalized the lesson. Disrespect and impulsive actions would not be tolerated. Serena's calm composure had made it clear that authority would be enforced without theatrics, but with precision. She walked slowly to her office, passing Marcus and the gathered staff. Each step was deliberate, measured, and exuded confidence. Officers straightened instinctively, and even the senior sergeants, usually accustomed to asserting dominance over new arrivals, felt the shift. Her authority had been demonstrated clearly, decisively, and without a single raised voice. Marcus followed her gaze and noticed the cameras mounted around the precinct. Every officer understood that the event had been documented, not for punishment alone, but to reinforce the hierarchy and ensure accountability. The slap had triggered immediate action and would serve as a precedent for future behavior. Later that day, Marcus sat at his desk, preparing the written explanation. The process was formal, detailed, and a subtle acknowledgement of Serena's authority. He realized that his actions were not just a personal mistake, but a public lesson for the entire precinct. Every officer, from rookies to seasoned veterans, would now understand the standard of conduct expected under the new captain. Meanwhile, Serena moved through the precinct, checking files, observing staff, and quietly reasserting protocols. Her presence was calm, measured, and effective. Every instruction, every look, and every subtle gesture reinforced that she was not only the leader, but the arbiter of authority. By the end of the day, the precinct had transformed. Respect, previously assumed or enforced through seniority, was now earned through acknowledgement of her authority. Marcus, once brash and overconfident, now understood the power of presence, composure, and measured execution. The lesson had been delivered silently but irrevocably. The precinct's operational flow resumed, but the energy had shifted. Officers moved with heightened awareness. Conversations were quieter, more precise. Tasks were executed efficiently. This slap, once an act of impulsive disrespect, had become a catalyst for structural recalibration. Serena's leadership was now unambiguous, her authority established in the minds of every officer present. The final signal of the day came when Marcus handed in his report to Serena. She reviewed it briefly, nodding subtly, her calm demeanor unwavering. The lesson was complete. Respect and compliance were not optional, and the consequences of ignoring authority were immediate and tangible. The precinct was no longer just a workplace. It had become a stage where authority, respect, and consequence played out in full clarity. Marcus Blake, once brimming with confidence, now felt a creeping unease. Each officer who had observed the morning's confrontation understood the subtle recalibration of hierarchy. Serena Davis's calm had not just corrected one mistake, it had established dominance across the entire station. Marcus rubbed his forearm, the memory of his impulsive slap burning in his consciousness. His colleagues glanced at him cautiously, some offering faint, sympathetic nods, while others observed silently, waiting for the next move. The lesson was clear. Disrespect would not go unchallenged, and authority was no longer assumed. It was enforced with precision. Serena moved through the precinct with measured steps. Her black tailored suit emphasized the poise and professionalism that radiated from her. Officers instinctively straightened, their movements sharper, their posture attentive. Even the senior detectives, normally accustomed to asserting their own dominance, found themselves adjusting subtly. Her authority was now tangible, a presence that could be felt in the room's air. She paused at the central desk where Marcus was filing his report. Her gaze swept across him, unflinching. "Detective Blake," she said softly, "ensure that your explanation is complete, accurate, and submitted immediately. Any omission will be noted." The weight in her voice was not in anger, but in absolute authority. Marcus swallowed hard, realizing that compliance alone was no longer a choice. It was mandatory. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his uniform and prepared the written account. The surrounding staff observed silently, fully aware that every word and movement would be analyzed and documented. Meanwhile, a junior officer approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" she asked, voice low. Serena glanced at her briefly, a subtle nod acknowledging her presence, and then continued her inspection of the precinct. Every officer recognized that the nod was a sign of inclusion and respect, a quiet demonstration that authority could be exercised without intimidation, but with clarity. Across the room, the unruly officer shifted uneasily. His earlier confidence, once bolstered by tenure and assumed authority, had evaporated. He began to notice subtle changes, colleagues now following Serena's instructions without question, murmurs of her competence spreading quietly, and even the commanding sergeants deferring to her presence. For the first time, he realized that this was more than a personal correction. This was a structural shift in power. Marcus attempted to speak. I understand," he stammered. Serena's gaze met his, steady and precise. "Good. Let this experience guide your actions moving forward. Authority is not demonstrated through impulsive aggression. It is earned through respect, composure, and adherence to protocol." Her words, calm yet resolute, reverberated through the room. Officers exchanged glances. Even those who had been skeptical of her leadership now acknowledged her capability. The lesson had not been subtle. It had been absolute. As the day progressed, Serena continued to walk through the precinct. She observed reports, directed operations, and subtly corrected minor procedural errors. Every instruction she gave was absorbed with immediate compliance. The hierarchy had been silently, irrevocably restructured. Marcus followed her, submitting his written account, noting every expectation she had outlined. The tension remained, a quiet but persistent reminder that the morning's events were a turning point. Officers spoke more cautiously, movements became precise, and casual arrogance was replaced by measured respect. The slap, initially a small act of defiance, had triggered a full recalibration of authority in the precinct. By the afternoon, Marcus realized the depth of his mistake. The respect he had assumed he commanded through experience was no longer sufficient. Serena's presence, her precision, and her unshakable composure had established a new standard, one that would govern behavior, compliance, and interactions throughout the station. The other officers, having witnessed both the initial incident and Serena's measured response, began to align themselves instinctively. Subtle adjustments in posture, cautious glances, and deliberate adherence to protocol reflected the new reality. Serena Davis was not just the boss by title, she was the undeniable authority of the precinct. Finally, near the end of the day, Serena called a brief meeting. "Everyone present has observed today's events," she said, her voice calm, resonant, and absolute. "Let this serve as a reminder. Respect, composure, and adherence to protocol are mandatory. Any deviation will result in immediate review and appropriate action." Marcus nodded silently, fully aware that the consequences of his earlier actions had already begun to influence his future in the precinct. The officers, quiet but attentive, absorbed the directive. The lesson had been delivered without spectacle, without shouting, yet its impact was profound. Authority had been asserted, hierarchy redefined, and respect restored. The precinct returned to operational tasks, but the energy had changed. Conversations were careful, movements deliberate, and the aura of command that Serena carried remained pervasive. Marcus continued his work, mindful of every action, fully aware that his first-day mistake had become a permanent benchmark in his career. By the evening, the staff and officers were aligned, the hierarchy restored under Serena's precise authority, and the slap that had once seemed minor was now a pivotal lesson in respect, discipline, and professional control. The stage had been set for ongoing success, and any further challenge would meet the same measured but undeniable command. The tension in the precinct continued to simmer throughout the day. Marcus Blake, once confident in his familiarity with the environment, now moved with a quiet caution, aware that his first-day error had already set in motion consequences far beyond what he initially imagined. The staff, both seasoned officers and new recruits, had begun to internalize the lesson. Serena Davis was no ordinary captain. Her calm authority and precise enforcement had established a new standard, and everyone felt it. Serena moved through the precinct deliberately, observing ongoing operations. Each officer she passed straightened instinctively, understanding that her attention could scrutinize any misstep. She stopped briefly at the records desk, inspecting case files with measured care, her presence alone commanding adherence to protocol. The subtle authority she wielded didn't require words. It was communicated through posture, gaze, and the quiet weight of her composure. Marcus watched from a few feet away. He had thought compliance would be sufficient, but now he realized the full scope of responsibility. Every action, every interaction would be monitored. The slap, once a moment of impulsive arrogance, had triggered a structural recalibration of authority in the precinct. He felt the weight of it in every glance, every step, every whispered conversation he overheard. The precinct radio buzzed with updates from field officers, yet even these routine communications felt charged. Officers spoke with a newfound precision, ensuring that every instruction and response adhered strictly to protocol. Any hint of deviation, hesitation, or casual disregard could be noted and escalated. Serena's silent influence had already reshaped behavior without a single command being shouted. At the briefing room, she gathered the team. Her posture was poised, her gaze steady. Today demonstrated the importance of respect, adherence to protocol, and awareness of hierarchy. She began calmly, yet the weight behind each word resonated immediately. Disrespect or failure to follow procedure will be met with immediate review and consequences. There will be no exceptions. The room absorbed every word. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had underestimated not just her authority, but her capability to execute control precisely and silently. Other officers who had observed the incident understood as well. There was no ambiguity in her command. The structure of authority had been reasserted flawlessly. After the briefing, Serena walked to the administrative area. She reviewed personnel files, carefully cross-referencing attendance, compliance, and prior incidents. Each action was deliberate, methodical, and precise. Even routine checks now carried the weight of authority, as officers realized that minor errors could now carry immediate consequences. Marcus approached her cautiously. "Captain Davis." "I've submitted my report," he said, voice low, attempting to balance respect with lingering unease. Serena glanced at him briefly, her expression composed, controlled, yet firm. "Ensure that your explanation is accurate and thorough. Any omissions will be reviewed," she replied softly. The subtle firmness of her tone conveyed that accountability had now been codified. There was no room for casual disregard. Meanwhile, officers began to discuss the events quietly among themselves. Some expressed relief that order had been restored, while others whispered acknowledgments of Serena's authority. Even those who had initially doubted her leadership now recognized the depth of her influence. Marcus, still processing the situation, realized that her calm had not just corrected a personal error, it had reset the power dynamics across the entire precinct. A young recruit nervously asked about the proper filing procedure, hoping to avoid errors. Serena's response was composed and instructional, highlighting the details with clarity while reinforcing accountability. The interactions, though calm, reinforced that authority was no longer theoretical. It was practical, visible, and enforceable. Marcus reflected on the cascading effect of his earlier actions. The slap had been impulsive, a moment of arrogance, but its consequences had reverberated through the structure of the precinct. Every officer, from senior detectives to administrative staff, had witnessed the authority she wielded and understood that future actions would be measured against it. By mid-afternoon, the precinct operated smoothly, but with an unmistakable shift in energy. Conversations were measured, movements precise, and casual arrogance had been replaced by respect and attentiveness. Marcus, once confident in his tenure, moved cautiously through the space, acutely aware that every interaction could be scrutinized. Serena finally paused in the main office, reviewing the day's incident logs and communications. Her posture remained calm, her expression controlled, her authority unquestioned. She had not raised her voice, yelled, or sought confrontation, yet the full measure of her leadership had been asserted. Every officer in the precinct, including Marcus, now understood that respect, composure, and adherence to protocol were mandatory. As evening approached, Marcus filed a final report and approached Serena. She acknowledged his submission with a subtle nod, reinforcing the lesson. Accountability was immediate and inescapable. The authority she demonstrated had recalibrated the hierarchy, ensuring that every officer understood their responsibilities and the consequences of failure. The day concluded with a final inspection. Serena walked through the precinct one last time, her presence alone realigning posture, focus, and attention. Marcus followed silently, reflecting on how a single impulsive act had led to a complete restructuring of respect and authority within hours. The slap, once seemingly minor, had catalyzed a profound and irreversible lesson. By the time the officers left for the day, the precinct had been transformed. The energy was subdued, disciplined, and acutely aware of Serena Davis's command. Marcus, humbled and cautious, had learned the enduring impact of authority wielded with calm precision. Every officer now understood a simple truth. Leadership was not assumed, it was demonstrated, and it was irreversible once asserted. The final echoes of the day left the precinct in quiet order, tension replaced with disciplined focus, respect embedded in every interaction, and a clear understanding that Serena Davis, the black woman they had once underestimated, had cemented her authority fully and permanently. The precinct had quieted into a tense stillness. The earlier slap, impulsive and disrespectful, had set in motion a cascade of authority that Marcus Blake could not have anticipated. Every officer in the room now understood that the hierarchy had shifted irrevocably. Serena Davis, the new black captain, radiated a calm but unshakable authority, commanding attention with every movement, every glance, every subtle gesture. Marcus sat at his desk, reviewing his own behavior and the official report he had filed earlier. The reality of his miscalculation hit him fully now. His arrogance had directly triggered scrutiny and immediate consequences. Each breath, each movement, reminded him that he was no longer just a seasoned officer. He was subordinate to a leader whose authority was absolute and unquestioned. Serena walked slowly through the precinct, inspecting ongoing operations with meticulous attention. Officers straightened instinctively as she passed, their movements precise, measured. The tension in the room was not born of fear alone, but of respect, acknowledgement of her capability to enforce discipline and uphold the standards of the station. Each interaction carried weight, and no officer doubted that she could assess, correct, and enforce consequences at any moment. Marcus attempted to meet her gaze as she approached his desk. "Captain Davis, he began, but she raised a hand slightly, a subtle, silent gesture of authority that immediately halted his words. "Your report has been received and reviewed," she said calmly, her voice low, precise, and controlled. "The consequences for your action will be formally implemented. Compliance and respect are not optional. You will ensure that your future behavior aligns fully with the expectations of this precinct." The room was silent as officers absorbed the gravity of her words. Even seasoned detectives who had once tolerated brash behavior now understood that Serena's leadership was absolute. The slap had been a catalyst, but the demonstration of her authority had solidified a permanent recalibration of hierarchy. The senior staff gathered for a brief briefing, all eyes subtly on Serena. She outlined expectations, reviewing policies and conduct protocols with methodical precision. Each word, each directive, reinforced that her authority was comprehensive: legal, procedural, operational, and personal. Officers listened intently, aware that deviations from standard behavior would now be met with immediate review and accountability. Marcus watched, humbled and increasingly aware of the consequences that had already begun to take effect. His initial act of disrespect had not only endangered his own reputation, but had become a teaching moment for the entire precinct. Serena's calm yet firm guidance ensured that the lesson was visible, undeniable, and irrevocable. Later, as the day progressed, Marcus was called into a private office with the senior HR representative. Documentation of the incident, witness statements, and compliance reviews had been compiled meticulously. Marcus realized that every aspect of the incident had been analyzed, cataloged, and was now actionable. Any attempt to minimize or justify his behavior would be met with formal disciplinary action, further reinforcing the authority Serena had already established. Meanwhile, Serena continued her rounds, observing staff interactions, providing subtle corrections, and ensuring that protocols were followed with absolute precision. Each officer she passed instinctively adjusted posture and behavior, acknowledging the scope of her authority. Her presence alone communicated accountability, command, and strategic oversight. The precinct had become an environment of disciplined respect, a reflection of her leadership. Marcus was summoned again, this time directly by Serena. She sat across from him, her posture calm and composed. "Detective Blake," she said softly, her eyes unwavering, "the actions you took this morning have consequences. You will undergo retraining, and your performance will be closely monitored for the foreseeable future. Any deviation will result in further action." He nodded silently, swallowing hard, fully aware of the gravity of his misjudgment. The weight of accountability was clear. Serena did not need to raise her voice or wield overt threats. Her calm, composed authority had already ensured compliance. Throughout the precinct, officers adjusted their behavior. Casual arrogance was replaced with careful professionalism. Every interaction, every communication, every gesture now reflected awareness of Serena's command. The slap, once a minor act of disrespect, had triggered a profound and irreversible lesson. Authority was to be respected, obedience was required, and the consequences of defiance were immediate and measurable. By the end of the day, the precinct operated with renewed order. Marcus filed additional reports, detailing not only the incident but lessons learned and acknowledgments of authority. The staff moved efficiently and attentively, every step a subtle acknowledgement of Serena's control. As the shift concluded, Serena stood near the exit, observing the precinct with the calm assurance of someone who had orchestrated a flawless realignment. Officers exited with measured steps, fully cognizant of the lessons imparted. Marcus lingered momentarily, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. A single impulsive act had been transformed into a permanent recalibration of respect and hierarchy. Serena finally walked out, shoulders squared, composed, and authoritative. The precinct had witnessed a demonstration of absolute control, executed without aggression, yelling, or theatrics. The ripple effect of that morning's slap had reached every corner of the station, ensuring compliance, respect, and disciplined conduct. Marcus watched her leave, humbled, chastened, and aware that the lesson would remain with him permanently. The precinct, once a space of casual arrogance and unexamined hierarchy, had been transformed into an environment where authority,